Welcome, everybody. Let's see. All right, well, welcome back. I hope you guys have been enjoying our session so far for the second day of DnA, Design and Architecture for AI Honolulu. My name is Kopua Pimentel. I work with Farah Choi and Associates. I'm also the co-chair of AI Honolulu's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And I will be your moderator for today. We're going to be talking about closing the gaps, the roots of organizational well-being. Before we kind of jump into things, I have some housekeeping items, some instructions for how to, best make, today the best event we can. You'll see at the bottom of your guys' screen, there should be a Q&A button with two little chat bubbles. That's the best place that you guys can put in questions that we have, and I'll be checking that box and asking our panelists. Asking our panelists as we get to the Q&A portion of our time today. Beyond the Q&A part, if you are having any sort of technical issues, you can contact our tech support at 808-454-7804, and the number right there on the screen. Also, this session qualifies for AIA CES learning units, and AIA Honolulu is the registered provider. All of our AIA Honolulu members will have their credits directly applied to their transcript within 10 business days. If you are not an AIA Honolulu member and need proof of participation in this event, you can contact AIA Honolulu for a session certificate using the email contact@aiahonolulu.org. Before I introduce our panel, though, we're going to just bring up a quick overview of the last of our events for DnA after this session at 3 p.m. So you guys can stick around for that. All righty, we're going to move into introductions of our panelists and our speaker. So first we have Sean Baums. Sean is an architect and principal at WCIT Architecture, an award-winning design firm of internationally trained architects and interior designers with a shared design approach that explores historical and cultural inspirations, incorporates indigenous and global sustainable strategies in meaningful and interactive ways, and has community at its core. With more than 15 years of experience designing award-winning collaborative learning spaces at universities across the country and within Hawaii, Sean's work is centered around the translation of the cultural and physical context into unique expressions of contemporary architectural form. Since joining WCIT in 2013, Sean has served as the project lead for much of the office's significant planning and urban design work by overseeing the design and community outreach. Next, we have Lisa Rapp. Lisa has over 30 years of experience in architecture, planning, and design of the large-scale resort and urban hotels, restaurants, commercial, mixed-use, and high-end residential projects worldwide. As AHL's hospitality and high-rise residential principal, she guides her team with design leadership that executes the client's overall vision, core values, and goals. She values the collaborative process within the office and achieving success within her team, finding it rewarding to create spaces that enhance people's lives and enrich their experiences. Next up, we have Kavika McKeague. Under the shadowed cascades of Pu'umalai, Palalai, Pu'umakakilo, and Pu'ukapole as his Punana, Kavika was raised by his grandparents and therein privy to cultivate a perspective of stewardship and community responsibility through their experiences. Kavika's academic and professional background in environmental and community planning with an emphasis in the advocacy of a Maoli perspective in urban design, master planning, and resource management for nearly 20 years has afforded him the opportunities to engage in difficult but necessary conversations across multiple sectors of industry. At present, Kavika is actively involved with a spectrum of community partners that are seeking viable and indigenous-based solutions to address a myriad of needs relative to affordable housing, regenerative agricultural practices, sustainable renewable energy solutions, and micro-scaled solutions to climate change. Next up, we have Jennifer Camp. Jennifer's passion for architecture and design was instilled in her at a very young age, as design, architecture, and engineering has been in her family for 4 generations. With her grandfather's encouragement, Jennifer studied abroad in Como, Italy, where she developed her love of travel, respect for cultural diversity, and the deep understanding that architecture reinforces the culture it is a part of. Jennifer always looks forward to collaborating and designing to create spaces that support a culture that is engaging. As principal of hierarchy, Ms. Camp brings over 25 years of experience to the firm. She has extensive leadership experience in mixed use and community center projects locally on Oahu and in Los Angeles. Jennifer is a board member and incoming president of NIOP Hawaii and volunteers her time with nonprofit organizations focused on sustainability and workplace satisfaction and safety. She is a founding member of Hawaii Healthy Building Experts. And lastly, we have our speaker, Giselle Santos Rivera, is an architect, medical planner, and global director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at HKS Incorporated. With national and international experience on healthcare, sports, residential, institutional, and commercial mixed-use projects, she thrives on inclusive community design, building belonging through equitable practices, and creating workplace environments that promote psychological safety and mirror the community it serves. Giselle is a storyteller, a 2015 Christopher Kelly Leadership Development Program Scholar, and a recipient of the 2018 AIA Associate Award. All right, welcome Giselle. I'm glad you're here with us. Today we'll be talking about closing the gaps, the roots of organizational well-being, with our presentation from Giselle starting us off.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I would love to be where you are all at. I will start with that. It's getting pretty dark over here, so I will start with apologizing if the screen starts to get a little dark. Hopefully the lighting that I have already will be enough, but please let me know if it starts to look a little off. So thank you again for the invitation and for the opportunity to share my story, which is what I love to do, and I think it feels pretty applicable in this time and in this conversation. So my panel or my presentation is about making the invisible visible. I hope you enjoy it. And even though it is a presentation, if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to ask away. So making the invisible difference, the invisible visible. Sorry about that. So I start my story always with Puerto Rico, where I was born. I was born in the Caribbean, that little tiny island there on that is bright white on the screen. And I love talking about Puerto Rico because I really show up as a colony of the US. That's what we are today, a Commonwealth of the US. We're US citizens, but we are a mix of Native Americans, the Taínos, the European Spanish, and the enslaved Black laborers that came to the island to support the economy at the time. The Puerto Rican citizenship, I get asked this all the time, has never existed because we've been going from colony to colony, or the colonizer to colonizer. But we have a very rich history as well. English is not my first language. So I always sort of show up with Puerto Rico on my sleeve, and you can see it's also on the screen behind me because I always want to build community with representation. So I also start with my parents. They are kind of overachievers. My mom is a dentist and a collector of firsts in her industry. She was the first woman dean of the School of Dentistry, the first woman president of the School of Dentistry, the first woman to be a dentist and a Latina and chair a council or an advisory group for the Obama administration. She's been doing all of these things her entire life, yet she tells the story that she came from humble beginnings. She had 2 pairs of shoes, those nice shoes, when she was going to college. So if it started to rain or if it got pretty bad, she would take them off and walk home barefoot, not to ruin her shoes. My father, also an overachiever, is an Air Force veteran. We rarely talk about the Vietnam War, but he is an Air Force veteran. He's also a lawyer. Now he's retired chaplain, but I mention these things because I didn't realize until recently that both my parents were very vested in building community. My mom did it through her work as a dentist, and my dad did it administrating 13 hospitals and also being part of the group in Puerto Rico that administered research on minority populations in healthcare. So I think inadvertently I was going to become something that had to do with health and EDI or JEDI somehow in my career, because it's sort of been ingrained in my life since the beginning. The story about my father is my dad bought his first car shining the shoes of the neighboring wealthy gentleman that lived on his way to school. So he's always been very proud to talk about his 1964 Mustang. He loves cars. My brother, also, neither of us went into officially healthcare. My brother is a mechanical engineer. He lives in San Diego. He loves the beach, of course. And I love talking about my brother because I think also it's sort of part of the genesis of who I am. I loved building things for him when we were growing up. And even though he's sort of adorable there, he actually is an auditor for airplane turbines and spacesuits. So he's kind of a brainy guy too. When I show up to the table, I show up with all of my identities. I always like to talk about my mestizo grandfather, who's a blend of the African Taino and the Spaniard. I show my mother and my father. You can see they're a different blend of Puerto Rican. My brother is a little bit darker than I am, so I always talk about this because colorism in my family was very present since we were growing up. I've always been sort of lighter than my brother, and that was very present because people would comment on that all the time. I also show a picture of my wife. The invisible difference. I am also part of the LGBTQ community. I'm very proud. On the background there, you see I did some of this genetic assessments, and I am very much a blend of the mix of the Puerto Rican heritage in my blood as well. So these are the intersections of my life. As I've mentioned, this is only 3, but of course I always highlight my nationality, my gender, and my community engagement. And in addition to these things, I feel like I'm also where I am because of the intersectionality of academia, practice, and volunteerism. So I started the story in Puerto Rico. I always elevate one of the reasons I ended up in architecture, even though that was not my preferred choice, or that's not where I thought I was going to go, because I love to destroy my parents' house, building spaceships and cars and towns and cities for my brother to make him happy. Went to an all-girl Catholic school. I was a Girl Scout, even though I enjoyed the Boy Scouts camp much better, which I was able to attend because of my brother. And as I mentioned, I thought I was going to go into genetics. I love the idea of the building blocks of life. So I went to the University of Puerto Rico to do my undergraduate degree. And I started working in a lab, and I hated working in a lab. The buildings were they were not very contextual. There was no connection to the exterior. They sort of were devoid of the tropical climate. And the lab spaces in particular were inboard. So they were block painted white walls. And there was no connection to light, to the environment. And I didn't really enjoy that. And now I recognize it's the built environment, how it makes us feel. So I started taking classes in geology and painting. And it was my geology professor that encouraged me to pursue architecture. And I didn't think I was going to enjoy it. I had done it when I was little. I built models and I built things. And I ended up doing a summer camp, and I fell in love with building models and fell in love with architecture. I've also been very interested from a very young age, and particularly in architecture, to build community. So I was part of CLEA, which is the equivalent in Latin America of the American Institute of Architecture Students. This is the Council of Latin American Students of Architecture. And I started working in Puerto Rico, where I was doing a lot of work with the community. At that time, you probably have heard about all the hurricanes that plagued Puerto Rico. So we still have a lot of communities that migrate to Puerto Rico, and they sort of appropriate the lands in some of the precarious areas in Puerto Rico. And the government at the time wanted to find space for them and wanted to relocate them. But we understood very quickly that in order to move a community, you have to understand the community. And a lot of the times the community is rooted in the built environment. So in order to move them and for them to want to move, we would have to mirror or create that same sense of belonging in our new location. So that was always in the back of my mind as I was studying architecture. I went to Syracuse University to get my graduate degree. And then I ended up in DC at Smith Group doing really amazing work locally. And I loved it, but I was always sort of finding that I needed my community. So I brought Pechakucha to DC. And I loved the idea of creating these platforms for people to engage. I didn't necessarily like to do the speaking parts, even though that's what I do now a lot. I enjoyed building that space for people to share their stories and thrive. I transitioned into HOK because I wanted to do international work. And I was doing really fascinating work, but I never got to see it. So I started to miss building community again. So I joined the AIDC committee and built La IDEA, the Latin American Interior Designers, Engineers, and Architects Committee, because I wanted the opportunity in some form or fashion to be able to use my native language, Spanish, to tell stories. So we had some vignettes or some meetings that were only in Spanish, but most of the events, of course, they wanted to be inclusive. So we had them in English. And slowly I started to be encouraged to join more leadership opportunities. So I did the Christopher Kittle Leadership Development Program. I was asked to join the National Associates Committee because this is something that I'm very passionate about. I was not licensed at the time. I was sort of encouraged to do that. So I wanted to amplify the voices of emerging professionals in DC and at a national scale. I looked up while I was at HOK and I sort of didn't see anybody that looked like me. I was really good at technology. I was really good at BIM. And I was starting to get offers outside of formal architectural practice. And they became sort of compelling. I thought maybe this is a journey that I need to take on. Maybe this is a path that speaks to me. And I could see people that sort of looked like me in leadership in these paths. But I received a call from HKS and they said, hey, I have an amazing opportunity. We saw you speak at the National Associates Committee. We know that you have an interesting background and you're doing some healthcare. Would you be interested in joining a local project that is about to start right in your community? And it was sort of an opportunity, an offer that I could not refuse. It's that image on the top left. It's the Georgetown University MedStar Surgical Pavilion. And it was a dream come true for me. Even though I had rejected healthcare for such a long time, I started to recognize that there was something in me that loved the idea of bringing people to health and wellness through the built environment. If I could have a way to affect how somebody heals, I wanted to be part of that journey. And I've been at HKS ever since. I ended up having the opportunity to join the AIDC board. And through that, I joined as well the Women's Leadership Summit. And in the Women's Leadership Summit, I started to see that at times when we were speaking about women in leadership or leadership overall, at times we sort of miss the opportunity to engage emerging professionals in that conversation. And I thought, well, if we really want to talk about the future, we have to engage them early on. This was at the time that the Equity by Design survey results had sort of come out. And I recognized really early that we were talking a lot about mid-career. And I felt like mid-career was already maybe a little late in the game to start pulling people in and making them feel like they belong, particularly women and people of color. And in that journey, as I started to sort of understand where my voice was in this space, I saw this quote by Anne-Marie Slaughter that says, "Only when women wield power in significant numbers will we create a society that genuinely works for all women, and that will be a society that works for everyone." And that's how WIELD came about, Women Inspiring Emerging Leaders in Design. And this was the idea of creating an event and a platform where women that already have achieved success or are on path to success can start to talk about their career pinch points, their challenges, and how they have achieved success despite the challenges that they have faced. And what was incredibly wonderful about this event that has been ongoing since 2017 is that most of the time, when we looked at these stories, they looked more like this, where it's nonlinear, where we're constantly trying to find our way. And in that path, we start to find our voice and our genuine purpose. And because that WIELD event ended up winning an award, the AIA Diversity Recognition Program Award in 2019, I was asked as well to then pursue an opportunity in the Strategic Council, and after the Strategic Council, the AI National Board. I finally, after 14 years, was able to get licensed, and that's why I have it up there. I'm finally licensed in the state of Maryland, but I also recognize the challenge that it posed getting licensed and understanding what it meant to be licensed and the value of licensure. And I wish, and anybody that is in part of this presentation or listening into the audience, I wish I would have taken it on early. I wish I would have encouraged myself and my peers to go through this journey. You forget how to study. At least for me, I forgot completely how to study. I forgot how to learn outside of what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And it took me a while to sort of get in the mindset of learning these new things, putting them together, and go through the process of licensure. So please get licensed early if you're able to. Ask for resources and build a community to do so. So as a part of this sort of large journey to get to where I am organizationally, the last association that I've joined is NOMA, and I'm the chair now of the Research and Development Committee. I'm very excited to find a way to amplify the voices that provide us to have a different seat at the table. So we're working right now to create a framework and a structure that would allow NOMA to create these position papers that will go out into the industry and elevate the need to create spaces and greater visibility for underrepresented designers and architects to affect the built environment within policy, within public health, and within these spaces that we're typically not in. So all of these things to say, I think I found that it is the intersection of my identities and my career and my journey that have led me to where I am today. It is not a linear path. It is definitely filled with issues, self-awareness, a lack of confidence, but also fearlessness in all of these moments. And I think in part that's where I am today. I received a call one day, and I think it's because I was gaining visibility, and they just sort of asked me if I was willing to take on this new role at HKS that was called Director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And the reason I said yes is because throughout my life and in my journey, I've always tried to build my village, and in doing so, build bridges across those differences so that we can find not commonalities, but ways to value each other and find that richness in who we are, and find then opportunities to share, innovate, and really come together in a way that empowers all of us. So what is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion? What is JEDI? So JEDI for me, it's a lens. It's a lens or a mindset that we apply on all of the things that we do, all of the processes within an organization that allow us to get closer to creating that sense of belonging in our organization. People usually ask me, what do these things mean? So I try to quickly share the baseline that I use to define the terminology. So justice, if we're talking about building the table, justice is knowing that there is a table and that you're able to access it. It's really about the policies and the practices in an organization that are set in place to dismantle the barriers, to acknowledge that sexism, ageism, and all of the isms exist, and we're here to dismantle all of them in our organizations and our community. Equity is being invited to sit at the table. It is the framework for access to success. And in other terms, it's really access to opportunity, but also recognition that not everybody shows up to the table with the same resources as everybody else. Diversity is having representation at the table. It's sort of a fact, right? It's the baseline, is where we are today, who we are, but also how we show up at the table and what that means for our representation. Inclusion is having a voice, an agency at the table. It's engagement. It's feeling like once you show up at the table, then you can really activate and be part of the conversation. And most importantly, belonging. It's being able to challenge and be challenged without retaliation. It's that psychologically safe space that is created with all the members in the group aligned in value and beliefs, in creating a more just, equitable, and inclusive world. So for me, JEDI to belonging is sort of an acknowledging that building the table is only the first step. We have to build the table and enable everybody else at the table. So why accommodate for these differences? Why is this work important? I think for me, it's important because we want to acknowledge that the future of our workplaces are increasingly more diverse. And if you look at this graphic that is part of the AI Guides for Equitable Practice, and it's a study from 2000 by Di Stefano and Masnevsky of Fortune 500 companies, when you look at performance and you look at the number of teams and the composition of the teams, it's really easy to see that if you have homogeneous teams, you're going to do okay. If you have diverse teams that are managed poorly, they will underperform. But if you have diverse teams that are managed well, and that's sort of the operative word, managed well, then they will outperform all the other teams in the organization and in the industry, and hopefully in all the organizations. So if we're saying that diverse teams are managed well, and we're thinking about the future of our industry, then we have to look at the future of our workforce. So here you start to see some research from the Pew Research Center that talks about the Gen Z generation. So Gen Zs, for example, 1 in 4 Gen Zs are Hispanic, meaning this is increasingly a more diverse generation than any of the prior generations. They are highly educated. In part, we can speculate that that is due to the pandemics, to the recessions. Jobs tend to sort of dwindle. People go back to school to get better positioned for better jobs, but they are highly educated. They also believe that human activity is partly the cause for climate change. And the reason I highlight that is because they also believe that the government should take part in being an active champion to affect change. So they believe in activism, and they believe in engaging government to do activism and advocacy. Also, as I mentioned, I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and this generation, 35%, so more than a third of the generation, knows or has met somebody that uses non-gender conforming pronouns like they and them. So they don't believe in binary constructs. They don't believe in these black and white areas of the world. They believe in purpose and genuine alignment of purpose and value and personal morals. So let's talk about innovation and talent. Part of this conversation, of course, I already mentioned, is about diversity and increasing diversity and why this work matters. You can see here in surveys that have been conducted by McKinsey since 2014, that the greater diversity, at least with women in executive teams, as you progress in these spaces, can increase your performance to innovation by 48%, meaning you need more women in leadership in order to outperform others overall. It says executive teams with more than 30% more women are likely to outperform those with fewer or no women at all. So that also means that companies can become more profitable, and they are also key drivers to innovation. So 73% more on revenue from innovation, and diverse boards are 33% more likely to outperform less diverse companies in profitability. So what does this mean for what happens when people look for jobs? In a survey for Glassdoor of 1,000 respondents, they found that 67% of job seekers overall look for diversity in workforce when evaluating an offer, and specifically 61% of women look at gender diversity in the employee's leadership team when deciding where to work. So we've already talked about the benefits of diversity, ethnic, cultural, racial, and gender diversity, but there's also a penalty for not doing this work. So over the last 5 years, we see a strong business case for gender diversity in corporate leadership, and the business case continues to get stronger. We look at profitability. The top companies outperform by 25%. But if you look at the graphic on the far right, we also see that as time progresses, some of the progress is going backwards. So even though a third of the firms have achieved real gains, most have remained static or have made little progress. So the penalty for lagging shows that the bottom tiered companies are 19% more likely than companies on the top 3 tier to underperform in profitability. Yet the advantage for the top tier companies is 11%. So that's a swing of 40% of increased performance if you are achieving greater diversity and creating a sense of belonging in your companies. So what is the current state of JEDI? Let's look back at Gen Zs. They bring a fresh perspective to the workforce. We've definitely seen this during the pandemic. Gen Zs expect the workplace aligned with their values, as I mentioned, in personal morals. They believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion that is highly valued. In Gen Zs value economic security, communication, and most of all, transparency. The penalty for doing some of these things and sort of creating an environment that is sort of lack of awareness of the things that are happening, particularly now when we're talking about the hybrid workplace, we've seen, and this is this data here from Entrepreneur says that 1 in 3 workers are ready to quit a job if they are asked to return to the office without flexibility. There is a study by a group, Zedwick Group, that study only AEC firms, and they show that 1 in 5 of AEC firms, 1 in 5 Gen Zs are ready to quit an architecture, engineering, and construction company if they are not afforded flexibility. And Basecamp, a while back, maybe a couple months ago, along Coinbase, had created a ban on political talk. So they had a policy that was banning political talk in their offices. And the day that the policy was under effect, 15 people quit that day and left the company. And that was just one day, it just kept trickling down. And what they start to say is that people want transparency, as we mentioned. They really want transparency and opportunities to show up authentically when they are in the workplace. I love to show this graphic from Gallup that says, even though we're in a crisis, even though we're experiencing all of the things that we are experiencing at the moment, even though there's challenges in flexibility and remote work, this is the time that we are most engaged. In the 20-year history of Gallup engagement strengths, this is the highest engagement that they have seen in the overall industry. And Michael C. Bush from the Great Places to Work that has been doing surveys during the pandemic also acknowledges that the firms that are doing this well, where they have the greatest engagement, have outperformed all the other organizations around the world, and they have increased their profitability by quite a lot. Actually, you can look that up in their Great Places to Work database. If you are not doing the work, or if we are not doing the work, other organizations are doing it for us. Goldman Sachs, for example, started an IPO rule last year where they will require any organization that wants to put forward a public IPO to have at least 1 woman on their board. In 2021, they had to have at least 2 women. And this year they revamped their entire board to reach gender parity. So they changed everything and they are finally 50-50 on gender parity on their own boards because they wanted to walk the walk after talking the talk. Organizations like Glassdoor are now providing employees to seek out and understand what is happening in the organizations. So I think it started 2 months ago, Glassdoor will allow all employees to sort their reviews through a particular identity if they choose so. So if a company, particularly large companies like AT&T and Walmart and Home Depot, if those companies have reviews that are by a particular identity, 5 or more reviews, they are able to sort and show what these reviews mean. And this is language from Glassdoor. The reason they're doing this is because they want prospective employees to know what it is like to be Black, female, or other unrepresented groups and how they work in a company. So I know that this is unlikely to happen in small architecture firms, but they do have a diversity and inclusion rank already on their website that it's alongside the same ones as ranking the CEO and if you would refer this company to one of your friends. Other companies like Chipotle are trying to tie executive compensation to diversity and sustainability goals. So Chipotle, for example, is said to have tied 10% of executive officers' incentive plans to these goals that they're establishing for the firm. So for me, JEDI in practice, I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I'm doing at HKS and what that looks like. So HKS is a firm that is global. We have 23 offices all across the world. We do almost every building type imaginable. And my role is to support all our offices in this work on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have started this work actually a while back, not necessarily the JEDI work, but environmental social governance, which is sort of the biggest umbrella that all this work enables. We have started in 2006. So we slowly started to build capacity on our sustainability goals. Then on social goals, we have a group, it's not necessarily a studio, but it's a group called Citizen HKS, where we provide people the opportunity to do the 1% solution, so do pro bono work and community engagement that they are interested in doing. So we've been doing that since 2014, and then in 2016, we started to build that initiative called Better Together, where we were elevating the issues of gender representation or equity and gender in the organization. In 2019, where we finished our strategic plan, we recognized that we needed an umbrella to house this language and this work that we were doing in order to create this new value proposition for our organization. So we decided that we were going to join the UN Global Compact. And in order to do so, we created the ESG umbrella. And we decided that we were going to not only pursue the UN Global Compact principles of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, but that we were also going to pursue 8 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. So you can see there, maybe a little faint, but we are pursuing the SDGs that are not sort of grayed out into the background, like climate action, good health and well-being. And I am tasked with supporting and establishing goals for 2 of the SDGs, primarily focused, although not solely on those, gender equality and reduced inequalities. So to support that work, we've created an environmental social governance structure that is composed of our Chief Sustainability Officer, our co-directors of Citizen HKS, our public interest design group, and the director of Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, myself. And we have branded this work that we're doing as ESG in design. And we were sort of brainstorming of what we wanted to do. We realized that ESG is in design and in order. So HKS has an ESG in design proposition. And within that proposition, we've created the JEDI statement. So environmental social governance means that we are focused on these 3 things holistically, and we're looking at them through the lens of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So for HKS, JEDI is our people first framework and the lens that we are using to look at all of the systems in our organization to create long-term what we hope to envision with everybody in the world, a more just, equitable, inclusive, and diverse world. In order to support that structure, we've created a governance structure that starts with a director, and then it has a council that is part of the strategy, advisors, champions, and ultimately, ideally, the entire firm is part of this JEDI governance structure. The council, alongside with me, they create the strategies and the ideas around implementation of what we need and we want to do firm-wide. The advisors tend to have a little bit more agency in the organization, and they are leaders in spaces that they're doing. So they help us vet the work. They sort of let us know, okay, if you've created this initiative and this is what you're doing, this is what it may look like if I funnel that through my practice and through my group. The champions, 1 or 2 people in each office that come together monthly to celebrate our culture, to celebrate who we are, to amplify our culture in recognition of our differences and celebrating our differences. And of course, the firm, as I mentioned, all employees are accountable for promoting this work at HKS. So they are part of the reason that we will achieve, hopefully, becoming a leading JEDI firm in the industry. As part of that framework, we have 4 pillars, which are firm equity, workplace culture, designing for inclusion, and advising for belonging or advocacy. So everything that we do in our organization falls under one of these buckets. It falls under workplace, which are, as I said, celebratory, firm policies, practices, designing, and advising for belonging. So I showed quickly I'll share some of the things that we're doing. We have a scholarship through AIA Dallas. We review their employee manual for inclusive language and greater equity. We present at NOMA conferences and other conferences to support the work that we're doing and to encourage people to also join in this work. There on the far left, sort of in the middle of the screen, is our NOMA Foundation fellow, Elijah Price. He joined us to do some of the work with research on community engagement and community equity. This is my favorite slide, but this is the work that some of the champions are doing. Every month they're tasked to acknowledge a celebration or a topic that they want to discuss. So they create this content around how to celebrate a particular thing each month. So they've created these videos that are about 15 to 20 minutes long, and we share them firm-wide, and they amplify their own voices and what they want to celebrate and how they want to celebrate. They also share content and decks on how to encourage these tough conversations around allyship, psychological safety, anti-racism, and all of these things in the organization. We align our design proposition with the design measures for excellence and our SDGs. And we promote engagement with our teams, our clients, and our users, creating things like personas, where we empower them to envision our designs through the lens of another person with a particular identity. We also want to be very mindful that we acknowledge the social determinants of health, which are, as you can see there, all of the factors that impact your health and well-being. And if you look at this graphic and you look at how these social determinants of health are divided, 50% of your health and well-being can be defined by the zip code of where you live. It's not only your shelter and your housing, but we know now that through redlining practices, historically, where you live impacts your access to health, to opportunities, to care, to education, all of these things. So we have a clear mandate to be part of the change to provide people with access to thrive. We also do things like external panels, where we talk about these complex topics like the future of work and hybrid environments, equitable development, the future of senior living and aging, social equity. And we do these Instagram stories. I think we do them every summer. And we celebrate 15 minutes. We amplify the voices of people that work in our firm, that span the gamut of everything that we do. Writers, photographers, people that do or lead organizational development or learning and development, and celebrate who they are and what they're doing. We are very clear about our commitments and what we're doing. So these are things that you can find online. If you Google HKS and the UN Global Compact, you will see the reporting that we have to issue every year, where we talk about our commitments, our goals, and we show progress. We also, this year, on the anniversary of the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, you can see also the update of our 2020 commitments and where we are today in our journey, or our DnA journey. So as I mentioned, we have to report to the UN Global Compact, and we do so every year. We reported on July 21st. I think we uploaded our communications on progress for the UN Global Compact. So in addition to some of the things that we do, and I mentioned this robust report covers sustainability, Citizen HKS and JEDI. We also have to show our metrics, and we have to show that we are moving the needle. So this is a little bit of a snapshot of that executive summary of where we are today in moving along on achieving not only greater diversity on our board and our leadership, but in the firm, retention and recruitment. So this is a little bit of the snapshot of 2019 and 2020. So every year, you can hold us accountable by downloading the document and sharing it with us, and seeing if we've made progress and how we've made progress. We've also created an internal metrics report where we not only show our alignment with ESG, but what we are doing internally. So it's very much an internal document, and we break down all of the things that we are doing to achieve our goals in JEDI. So we show all of our gender data, all of our racial and diversity data. We also include some of the survey data on LGBTQI representation, but we also celebrate where people come from. So we have, we're showing where everybody was born in the US and all the languages that they speak. And it's actually become incredibly useful when we present to clients and we are in a particular demographic where they have a great population that speaks a certain language. We can say, we have people in the firm that can support that progress or that project, showing up authentically with their native language. In doing this work as well, we have also wanted to create these snapshots readily available. So if you go online on our esg.hksinc.com website, you can see a snapshot of our very robust report. It talks about our what, our why, and how we're doing this, why we've aligned with the UN Global Compact, and what our ESG and design proposition is. You can also go directly to our diversity and inclusion page, our sustainability page, and Citizen HKS. I love this website because it really shows with interactivity some of the things that people are already doing to achieve their goals that they've set out in any of these facets. You can hear people share their experiences as well. There's an audio snippets, and it links to all of the things that we're doing, and including, of course, the report, but also all of the other web stories about the work that we are doing. And for example, like the Limitless panel, this is not work that we are doing. It's how we are amplifying the voices of others in this work because we value what they're doing and we want to be true partners to them in this work. So this is my family. This is my story. Oprah says that speaking your truth is the most powerful tool you have. And storytelling for me, it's a powerful tool indeed. For me, what I want to share is that even if your story doesn't necessarily change the world, if it doesn't feel like all encompassing, which at times mine doesn't by any means, I'm sure your story has the power to change somebody's world for the better. I share my story because representation matters, because it is important to be visible, to be open, to be vulnerable, to show up authentically. Because I hope in my intersections and my experiences, you also find power in your intersections and your identities, and you learn to build bridges across those differences to empower others as you empower yourself. So for me, this is an opportunity to make myself and my identities and the things that I'm doing elevated to a different place, because it is pretty much a funnel of what other people are doing and valuing what they are doing to amplify these voices. It's about making the invisible visible and sharing every story, because every story is worth being told. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share my career pinch points, my challenges, and my story. And I hope it empowers you to share your story as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Giselle. So for the audience, just that you all know, we're going to transition from Giselle's presentation into our panel discussion. This is the time where we will be answering questions. We already have a few asked in our Q&A box. But so we're gonna bring on our local panelists to lead us in discussion and share their thoughts on basically how this applies to Hawaii specifically and our, unique environment here culturally and physically as well, of course. So our first question we'll take from the audience. What suggestions do you have for small firms to support JEDI and ESG work in a sustainable way?
Is that for me or for everybody?
It can be for everyone. It can be for everyone. We have a wide range of representation also in firm size as well. So if any of the smaller firms would like to take a stab at that, that would be great as well.
If nobody else starts, Kapua, thank you so much. And Giselle, thank you so much for your presentation. I guess the easy answer is just allowing them to make oh, by the way, my name is Jennifer Camp, Hierarchy LLP. Just to allow folks to make the mistakes, and let them know that they have somebody to support them in the back. Just if as a small firm, we all see each other, we all know each other all day long, every day, and you can kind of, in a larger firm, you can kind of hide away and not be seen for a fair amount of time. But in a smaller firm, it's a little bit more intimate, and you clearly see mistakes, challenges, awards, and some wonderful thoughts and progress in your work. Allowing folks to be able to give them a place for that. If you're going to be, what we do is do like a round table. Hey, what's everybody working on today? Because of the pandemic, we had to do it. We had to make sure that everybody was kind of, what are you guys doing? Please don't feel alone. The first question that we always asked was, how are you feeling? We want to make sure that everybody's productive, but we also want to make sure that they are psychologically, emotionally, and mentally healthy in order to be able to do good work. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
I don't know if WCIT is the next largest, and that makes me next up to bat here. But I did think it was interesting, listening to that presentation and trying to kind of postulate how this transitions, and knowing that HKS is, as an organization, as a firm, represents probably a team that's larger than all the membership in AA and Honolulu combined. Kind of like, how can we take some of that infrastructure and knowledge and then downsize it in a way which can be applied to smaller situations. And I think it's actually interesting, Jennifer, that you started. I think one key takeaway from not necessarily this presentation, but a presentation at the Expo a few years ago by a panel that your partner, Jennifer, was on with Beth from ASB. I think it was kind of something that resonated with me significantly, and that they said that it's a bank, right? It's a bigger structure, and they were redoing their corporate offices. But she said that she doesn't approach things from a sense of employees or staff. She doesn't use that word, and that everything is team. And I think I've tried to take that aspect and mentality, that if you don't think of things hierarchically and that everyone needs to contribute in their own way, then it kind of helps to break down some of those barriers. For us, I think, as a smaller firm or a mid-sized firm here in this market, I think having that hierarchy is just difficult, because everybody here has to be able to do a little bit of everything. That's just how our office functions. And the smaller the firm, the more that you kind of become a jack of all trades or a Jill of all trades. And I think that that's kind of one mentality that I think if you kind of can break down the hierarchy, make things more personal, have that relationship and connection with everyone on the team, that's something that kind of really can build equity and that sense of belonging that Giselle had mentioned in her talk.
Yeah, I just want to jump on to what Sean just said. I totally agree with that. And I think it's possible in larger firms as well. And really the key is what Jennifer started off with, and actually Giselle touched on as well, is that feeling of inclusiveness, breaking down those barriers, keeping things as transparent as possible, and making sure that everyone on your team, in your firm, feels safe, right? So that they don't feel like they will be judged based on wherever their background is from, that it's a conscious decision in your firm that you create that safe space. So people feel like they can speak up, they can be heard, they can be very open about any ideas and not feel like at the end of the day, they're going to be judged or criticized. And when you have that sort of a culture in your firm, no matter how big or small you are, I think you'll just get so much more out of it. The entire firm gains from having that openness and gaining all those multiple perspectives. So.
And I guess I'll tag on too. So Lahamai, Kavika McKay, Group 70. So I'm not sure we stand in numbers with other firms, but I guess you can say we're one of the larger firms. But what everyone already said is to amplify that sort of state of consciousness is, well, and I also have to mahalo Giselle for that excellent presentation. And when we first met, I got so excited about the acronym of JEDI. So I thought the most appropriate quote to share here as she was talking is, well, there's two. One from a Hawaiian context, one not so Hawaiian, but the Hawaiian context is something I carry in my spirit as a leader here, which is Iki Kaloa Eke Kuahu, which translates simply to the master practitioner is imbued by or is given access to knowledge, wisdom, and understanding through the maintenance and care of the kuahu, which in this sense is a set of prescribed values that we individually bring to the table with one another, and sort of in that sort of Hawaiian-esque idea that, you know, when we're in the spirit of aloha, and where it's not aloha being commodified, marketed, put onto a label, name of a company, but we're bringing a sincere degree to connect with one another, recognizing our human beingness with each other. That can happen at any level, right? It takes leaderships to be sort of radical, in the sense, if we define radical from a space that's about fundamental leadership, sort of reawakening from a root or original source. So for Hawaii, in Hawaii, if we start to lead with aloha from a very real place, then to me, you know, magical things can happen. So my non-Hawaiian quote to complement that is, luminous beings are we, not this crude matter, from one Mr. Master Yoda. Because again, if we can recognize the light that's within us, that is true, that the true sense of our aloha, and how we bring that into our practice. And again, I'm not an architect here, I'm bringing up a planner perspective, but again, in our firm, we're we do a lot of cross-cultural interaction and engagement. You know, that can't really happen unless you have trust, unless you have trust in each other, trust in the work, trust in where, you know, again, Giselle spoke of your mo'olelo, like knowing where another person is coming from in their perspective and their journey. And then fundamentally from there, you can take the first step forward as a leader to access that idea of more of our human being than our human doing. You know, we do really good as firms, I think, to track measurements of success, whether it's profit, revenue, utilization rates, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for me, a role I like to think I want to foster here is to look at the human beingness, that inner spark, that marker of our awareness, that energy it brings, our creative abilities to the forefront. Because again, that's the gift we've been given in the role of design, is to innovate and create and be able to translate other people's stories and dreams. So how we do that individually and collectively, and then extend it out into our communities, is something I think, you know, we all can continue to pursue. Thank you.
All right, mahalo, you guys. That was a great answer to that audience question. The next one is maybe building on that, pushing a little bit further into maybe some more concrete examples and success stories that you may have had in your work as leaders in your respective workplaces. So what is something that you've done, whether in practice or policy, you know, implementation, that has made your workplace more equitable or made space for that psychological safety that Giselle has talked about? I think we should try our best to give very concrete examples, just for the firms and leaders out there who might be, you know, just learning about these things and not sure what even the first steps are. So take it away, panel.
One thing that comes in, it's something that is really just very personal, right? I mean, it's not so much, you know, a construct or a policy that I'm going to be talking about, but it's more about leading by example and understanding that diversity, you have to show that diversity in leadership and all across the board, because what that does is that helps people that are coming up in the profession to see that, hey, you know, there's a mom who's a leader in the firm, so apparently this is possible. And when you give a face to that person, then I think they get more encouraged and understand that there is no barrier. For our firm, 2 of the 3 officers in our firm are women, and we're both moms as well. And so that helps us as well understand what other younger moms might be going through. We've been through it. We can understand and we can sympathize. And they also understand that we have that perspective. And I think that gives some comfort. So, and we try to be as transparent as possible. I think the other maybe concrete example is our CEO always likes to say that our firm is like a pancake. And kind of like what Sean touched on, is that not so much hierarchical, but really more collaborative. And we really consciously try in our teams to make sure everyone feels that they can speak up. And it is not a matter of level of experience or background or anything like that, because everyone's background has value and we can all learn from that. So that's another thing that we try to encourage in our culture in terms of that, because I think that also helps provide a good safe space for people to learn and grow.
I think, I guess similar to that, Lisa, at least for me, I think it's just trying to figure out day-to-day small little policies that could in some way build to become a larger cultural office culture, larger ethos that can help be reflecting of those small gestures. So I think for me personally, like Lisa just mentioned, I've taken a concerted effort to try to invite the team to like client meetings. So unless there's circumstances where that's something that's just, you know, a challenge for whatever reason, having the ability now with beyond Zoom and you're just used to having 50 people kind of all calling in, I think it's important. It's important that because it's hard to mentor that dialogue, and how can you expect someone to be able to contribute and have a voice if they aren't actively involved in those conversations? So even if they're kind of sitting there and not being fully vocal, I think having the ability to have that presence, have access to those conversations, and I guess have the design leadership reach out to have them answer questions that you know that, hey, this is something that they looked at and worked on. So I don't need to be the one that says, here's what we found. This can be something that they can contribute. And I think it helps to positively enforce and empower and kind of give them ownership of the task that they're really helping with. I think that's kind of a big first one, at least that I can think of. And then also it's just when it comes down to trying to negotiate for teams and kind of select teams for individual projects is trying to make a concerted effort to say, okay, is my team representative of the office? And I think at least with the last two teams I've kind of come on board with, where I've had a little bit more to say in that, I've tried to get more balance between them. It's not quite 50-50 there, but that's a challenge still with our office, at least in terms of gender equity. But I think moving forward, it's something that is important to try to make sure that each project manager and each team leader really takes a positive step to looking at themselves.
Yeah, Sean, I think there's one thing that you mentioned, or actually you didn't even mention, you had your background when we first met as a group. You were in, like, I guess it was your bar or something like that. It was kind of cool. And I think being able to make us human, or make us people instead of not just team members. We're coworkers and we're together outside of the 40 hours of work, right? So one of the things that we do, and it's in terms of specific examples, in the summertime we do a thing, it's called Half Day Fridays, and we, you know, everybody, architects, we work well over 40 hours before we get to Friday afternoon at 12 o'clock. But what we'll do is we'll do like a team building event. It could be a job walk as a group, and if you have like an office manager who's never really stepped foot in a site, that's a pretty kind of a cool thing for him or her to do. So we get different people throughout the summertime to kind of like delineate what we're going to be doing for those Half Day Fridays. And so did axe throwing, and so wanted to do wine tasting, and we actually did some volunteerism at a lo'i patch, and that was kind of cool. We all got down and dirty, and it was really fun, and we did like a pahana afterwards, and you kind of get to know everybody outside of your work environment. So just as team members, like if you're in a sport, you have to be able to trust that person that they're going to throw down for you. You're doing all of this outside of the office, and you're going, hey, this is really, really cool. You know, I'm there for you when you need me during a meeting, during a Zoom call, or just when we're doing some sketches together, so that you get to know that person, not necessarily being friends, but they're humans. They're a person, and they do these things, and they have these kinds of interests, and you recognize that in them. And I think that's really important, as especially me personally, having a small firm. I like to know who I'm working with, and I like to know them beyond their degree, or beyond their what it is that they like to focus on. You know, are they an architect for medical? Are they an architect for schools? You know, well, they're actually somebody who really knows how to pick some weeds and make sure that we're getting rid of all invasive species in a lo'i patch. And guess what? Their favorite drink is such and such, and they love to eat these crazy saltine peanuts or whatever. You know, you just get to know that person. You get to know their humanity.
That's a beautiful answer. I can't follow that up, Jen. That's awesome. But the whole idea of the role of male eye, things that sustain you. So physical sustenance with food, spiritual sustenance, being on the Aina, similarly, Group 70 has deployed specific measures like that. I guess we're blessed in the capacity. We even have sort of inner workings of different committees that look at things like fun, wellness, health, and defining health by all kinds of different measures. Providing educational opportunities, PD, which I think a lot of folks, also support. So nothing really sort of out of the box. But I think one thing I found in my near 20 years here is we truly do deploy a sense of community give back, and we do that in different kinds of ways that are beyond sometimes the purchase of a table to attend an event, and you get to be shoo for a little bit. I mean, those are fun too, don't get me wrong, but I think where we can actually have a meaningful impact. So whether it's through providing ourselves or providing access to ourselves and the work that we do to youth, right, through schools, to supporting sort of urban schooling opportunities in high schools, through this connections with an internship program. Again, just sort of building the basic blocks. I think within our company itself, again, I think it starts with the individual aspect. So for me, and again, I only can speak for, I guess, how I see my world in my kulia on the here at the office. But since becoming a principal about 2-3 years ago, I think for me, I've been more quote unquote like on the worker side of the mentality, for the first 17 years, and then now playing a role in leadership and supposedly some purported authority in being a principal. But really, I think bringing the balance of those thoughts in my thinking process and recognizing, well, what can I do in my capacity in this role now as a leader to either inform or more importantly, to ask, how can what I do help you as a fellow team member, as a colleague? And yes, to what Sean said too, hey, if I'm bringing you to a meeting, yes, I'm sorry, I kind of need someone to take notes if I'm facilitating, because I can't do two things at once. I suck at doing two things at once. But if you're there as a quote unquote junior staff member, I still expect you, and I'll use the word expect, to have mana'o to share, because again, I think one of the beautiful things about all of us is that we are all the same. Like I said in the beginning, we all share a light, and that light is we're unique. We're unique in our experiences, we're unique in our perspectives, we're unique in our journey. But when we come together, I don't have all the answers, you don't have all the answers, but collectively, maybe together we can find a way. And again, I use a lot of Hawaiian to explain my thinking process, because that's how I was taught by my tutu. There's a powerful Hawaiian word that, as much as we talk about aloha and kokua and laulima and lokahi, some of the things that maybe are familiar to people who don't speak the language, is this word lauaki, L-A-U-A-K-I. If you want to write it down, again, L-A-U-A-K-I. It's a beautiful word, and it's a powerful word that simply says, when we come together of one mind, one spirit, one thought, to bring our collective experiences to the table to accomplish a particular task or goal. So to me, what I like to continue to see us try to aim for in the work that we're doing is to create that spirit of lauaki, like to encourage people to talk, to share. And, again, yeah, there's a hierarchy of sorts, but at the end of the day, we're collectively just trying to move ourselves forward as individuals to make for a better Hawaii. So how we do that, to me, really is dependent upon, again, that humanity aspect. I think Jennifer was citing there at the end. So
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a couple more things to both what Jennifer and Kavika have been talking about, which is really awesome. It is that humanity and then that sense of community. And I think something that is, again, a conscious thing that we all do, and it's something that we all need to pay attention to, is to understand that even though, in Hawaii, we have a very unique culture, it's great, we have a melting pot, traditionally we have that, and it changes all the time. But that doesn't mean that we are immune to implicit biases. So I think we all together have to know that we all have some of that bias, depending on how we grew up, who we knew in the past, and all that kind of stuff. And understand that, and really make a conscious effort to understand that we all have it. And so we all have to recognize that, and then try to move beyond that, and really see and constantly be looking at the company, the firm, the people, and remembering that we have to always sort of self-check ourselves and be really open and be okay that we're not always perfect that way, and that's okay as long as we continue to work on it. And then as far as community goes, Giselle, you mentioned the 1% program. AHL, the company I'm from, we actually do participate in that as well. So every year we contribute 1% of our work effort to a nonprofit organization. And I honestly can say that I think actually our company gets more out of it than the nonprofit does. The firm, the people that are participating in the projects that are helping the nonprofits, I mean, it opens up your eyes a lot more. It gives you that much more perspective. It gets you out of that box. You learn so much from that. And everyone just enjoys doing it. It just feels great on top of that, right? So it's very win-win. And like I said, the more experiences you can give your firm and your team members and your staff, that will gain them different perspectives and learning to share and understand all different walks of life, I think that's even more enriching personally and professionally.
I love that. I have to say, I am moved by this conversation. This is amazing. And it made me reflect on what I've done outside of all of the spiel that you just saw. And I recognize that for me, and I don't know if it's in my leadership role, but accessibility. Like for me, it's truly being accessible, not always being available, although clearly I'm not. This is Friday night and I'm here and I'm loving it. But it's not necessarily being available all the time, but being accessible. And accessible is a big word. For me, accessible means that I have to constantly be vulnerable and open and be comfortable making mistakes. And I continue to make them every day. But I what I'm hearing a lot of this conversation in different ways is sort of access to you as a leader, as a person. And I hadn't thought about it that way. So thank you for that. And I hope that I become more accessible, like me as a person, and my thoughts to change conclusions become more accessible so that people can challenge them. And then I grow better too. And I hope that happens for others as well.
I like that comment about vulnerability. As leaders, we have to be comfortable enough to share all aspects of us, right? Good, the bad, everything. And it's okay. And when, staff sees that, oh yeah, she did something really stupid there. And I guess that's okay because look, she's a principal. And I mean, and that's okay. And I think that helps people realize, hey, I don't have to be a certain way to get to a certain place, and all of that is okay. And I think everybody on this panel, I get that feeling that you're like that, and we all share that. And again, being accessible and letting them see, how we do things, and then admitting, hey, this is my experience. Here's where I made a certain mistake, and this is how I tried to recover from it. And people understand, okay, that's. And I've had mentors like that too, that would share and say, it's okay. I've made mistakes in my life too. Here's what happened. I think that helps open up that conversation a lot more as well. So.
No, I love that, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you for being honest and open and transparent about that. That's so awesome. Because yeah, I'm a leader that messes up every day, in some fashion where I self-critique and self-assess and could I handle this conversation better or whatnot, right? I kind of hold that. So to me, it's like taking ownership of even these ideas of leadership pathologies, right? Sometimes we communicate in overconfidence, right? Because we're actually insecure, because we don't know the answer, or we get too impulsive because we think we just have to get to the solution because the client's waiting for an answer, or if we're over budget, we just have to finish the job, or some other external force trying to get us to the end goal. Or there's a sense of rigidity where it's like, no, I'm going to hold fast because this is the way we've done it for the last 20 years, and this is how it was passed on from the project manager who taught me, without sort of being open to, well, are there other ways of quote unquote knowing and being and thinking? And to me, that's when we get into the real conversation of, diversity has to be one of promoting inclusivity of perspectives that are not your own. And even though it may not be comfortable, to foster that as a leader, I think is the best thing we can do for all of our staff, because it just opens up the door of possibility of solution-driven energy to take on these things that are so complex. The other Noya that comes to my mind right now, it's more related to hula, but it goes, Ole Pauka Ike Kahala Ho'okai, not all knowledge is in one house or one school. And, you know, for me, like one of the things I want to break down in Hawaii is sometimes it's thinking that, ooh, WCIT is the competitor. How come? If we're doing, you know,
Yeah.
sorry, Sean, I'm just kind of picking you, kind of saw you first. But, you know, the idea is like, no, we both trying to, we're both trying to do good work in Hawaii. We're both bringing our talents to the table. And, you know, the issues, whether it's going to be coastal, you know, climate change, sea level rise, homelessness, houselessness, food security, no one firm is going to be able to come up with the answers by themselves. So to me, how do we foster that sense of inclusivity, not just amongst within our company, but amongst each other as a wide practice? To me, that's something I want to try to take on a little bit too. Maybe I'm saying too much, but oh well, I said it. Let's go.
That is so awesome, Kavika. So awesome. Yes, I totally agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, it's funny because you were starting to say that. That's kind of where my head was drifting. You know, I think this profession is so hard. It takes so long to get a project from conception to completion. There's too many steps. And I think that this old kind of outdated model of this kind of omnipotent being sitting from a high, this Ayn Rand kind of like, here's the design, make it so, it doesn't happen. Like it's too collaborative and it takes too many voices in order to kind of shelter and shepherd this thing along. And so I agree. I think the profession and kind of being this open source of information and being able to kind of like live and learn and engage the community itself is really important. I think being as a New Yorker, I think coming out of this uber competitive kind of hustle, I think landing here and trying to find a pathway and a different kind of voice and tone within this new context, that's something that's really been empowering. It's just like, we got to just stop, you know, we got to be able to make a phone call. And I think these events are so informative and dynamic because it allows everybody to kind of see like we all kind of have the same struggles, and hopefully we can all kind of come together and find kind of common ground to help progression, because otherwise it'll just be too slow to adapt.
Thank you all. That's great. We have about 10 minutes left, so one more question maybe that each of us can take a few minutes to answer. But I want to make sure that we're also addressing Hawaii specifically in some of these, if of course you have that experience to work here. But the question, I want us to maybe elaborate more on some of the topics that Giselle brought up with the next generations, with Gen Z, and the challenges and differences that are coming up with our younger team members, and how that relates to access to our industry, to the offices that we've already set up. And if there are any steps that can be taken to increase access for people who are currently underrepresented in Hawaii's context and otherwise as well, it would be helpful even for Giselle, for your context and your manao on those things too.
I'll just start off real quick to go kind of way back, right? As far as how do we do this? How do in our profession, or in any profession really, do we try to achieve those goals? And I think it starts way back in our educational process, right? In schools. Giselle, you brought up where your zip code is 50% of that develops who you are. And I think, you know, in order to get the optimum diversity is we really have to start back in people's homes, in the education and access to education, and access to, you know, parks and different venues. And it needs to be a bit more equitable. And when and the thing that kind of bugs me still is when access to education is based on financial status, that really cuts so many opportunities, not just for the individuals that don't have that access because of that, it really hinders our profession as a whole, because then there are probably these shining stars that maybe we're not gaining access to because of that. So, you know, we really need to start thinking about that. How do we as a profession reach out to all the different neighborhoods? How do we get education so it's more equitable across all neighborhoods, so that all of these opportunities are afforded across the board, and that we're not making this, you know, making neighborhoods or financial status a barrier to this. And then I'll stop there.
I think this is the hardest question, Kapua, right? Kind of maybe it's indicative of some of our slowness to response is that the hard part is the response is not so immediate. I think that's the challenge, right? And that's hard to kind of gain inertia when you're feeling like, okay, these investments that we're trying to make and, you know, high school programs and mentorships and I mean, even 8 years after you start Manoa, you end up with your DARC. It's like that process alone is tremendous. So I think it's just trying to find kind of small advances and allowing those to energize the rest to kind of give you hope that it's important and we need to keep momentum. And I think until you kind of find those small victories, that's why I thought it was so interesting. So what she had shared and kind of just being able to take the initiative and kind of stand up, that level of attraction starts to build. So I think trying to keep the focus on small things that can build into larger things is probably an approach. With this one, it'll pay off as the kind of the generation progresses into the next one.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I'm trying to think about. I know when the question was centered on sort of youth and next generation, right? That's sort of the idea as a cultural practitioner that, you know, I have a kumu and I was blessed to learn from her, and now I've acquired a certain body of knowledge and I've evolved that into practice, and now I have my own family. I have a daughter and 2 Hanai sons. That you know, what is my role? Again, we use this word kuleana very loosely. We say responsibility, but you know, for me, I translate that as ancestral obligation, right? The continuity of that mo'olelo, going back to Giselle's first point of storytelling and narrative. You know, mo'olelo literally means a succession of olelo, of ideas that get perpetuated through speech, through chant, through storytelling, through mele, become the foundational basis from which then those values that we do consider ourselves to be so unique and special to Hawaii are perpetuated through the movement and through language. So the point of, I guess one point I'm trying to make is just trying to understand, you know, how to be that conduit, recognizing that, you know, with the next generation, you know, how we communicate, how best do we value the knowledge that's being shared, the mechanisms and portals by which information is exchanged, you know, perhaps is different than how I was brought up, and now you know, it's in a different era. I don't have an answer for that, but what I do know, I feel like the solutions are there, the ike is there, the resources is there. So sometimes, you know, the question I pose to myself is, you know, why do we deal with certain things that are very complex without a sense of things being able to move forward, you know? And to me, it's about the energy and urgency that perhaps is lacking, and the energy and urgency that comes along when we're able to sort of immerse ourselves into either the organization, the community, the group of individuals by which is being affected the most by it. So for example, been blessed to work on the Pu'uhono or Waianae project. And the long story short there, if you don't know, it's a houseless village in Waianae that is finding a permanent home. So it's not a homeless village, it's a houseless village. Won't go into all the details, but you know, again, there's knowledge, there's resources, there's policy, but really what it was the energy and urgency being taken by the leadership to make this happen. For me, when I got to sit there and visit with them, and not just with the adults, but with the children, and realizing, you know, what I saw perhaps on my first visit with them was something they were lacking, right? They were lacking a place, a bed or whatnot, but they still had this resiliency in their spirit because they had a sense of identity and connectivity and relevancy to the Aina itself, and that couldn't be taken away from them. To me, that was powerful, where it instilled in me, I gotta get my act together because these people need to find their new home. Anyway, I don't think I'm answering the question directly, but it's making me think, like, how do we really foster intergenerationally a necessity for energy, and within that urgency to come forth to start to really make true social transformation come to pass? And that's a question mark still in my head.
Yeah. And, you know, you're saying you're not quite answering, but I think you are. What I'm hearing from you is that you're listening, right? And when we listen to people and their needs and their wants, we can learn so much more as well as understand a lot better, and then start to be inclusive and to break down, again, what we talked about, our implicit biases, right? We think we know where people are from. We think we know what they want, but are we actually listening to what they're saying? And are we really understanding? And, you know, when Giselle shared her story, it helps us to better understand the person. So when we start to listen, like you were in your houseless project, right? You start to really understand the people and the place and where they're coming from in the perspective. And then it starts to break down those biases. And so that's what I got of what you said. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Lisa, I think listening is like of the utmost, and it doesn't matter who is at the table or how old they are. I think one of the biggest things is something as simply as put as, I will ask my daughter how to do certain things on the iPad. And I give her that grace. She will teach me and she'll go, oh, Mom, you know, and if you can just turn that into, how do you do that in the professional realm? Okay, your team members are not going to roll their eyes at you, but you give yourself the grace to make the mistakes, and you give them the ability to show you the mistakes that you've made. And maybe we can have an amazing design along the way. You know, you can have something really, really great with, you know, this level. One of the things that I often dealt with in my early career was, when I'm Latina, you know, see too many brown architects. I'm a woman. And one of the biggest ones was I looked young at all times. I mean, it was like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Yeah, I'll have her do the bathroom details later on. And by the way, bathroom details are very important, but that's something different. Anyhow, remembering what that feels like. And I always tell this to my kids. I always tell this to my nieces and nephews, is remember what it felt like when you were the youngest kid in the playground and they didn't want to let you play on the team, and how horrible that felt, and how much energy they brought to that team once they were chosen, because they were so happy to be there and part of it, and you won. So why can't we turn that into our practice? Why can't we say, okay, every team member, doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what color you look like, doesn't matter what gender, you bring your best self forward at that table, you're gonna have a successful project. Bringing your best self forward without looking at that. That's why I'm super excited about that. And, you know, hey, I don't know how to use an iPad, but I'm going to learn from the youngest member in the team. So, you know, and I'm going to be able to teach them something too.
I think for me, it's about intentionality, so intent, and being very clear in what it is that I need, and also pulling people and finding ways for them to let me know what they need, but being very intentional and creating that space to say, I need you to do this as well with me. And I think, yeah, it's pretty much what you'll have said is, it's the intentionality. It's being very clear. This is what I want to do because this is the outcome that I want to get. And translating that and being very transparent so that people will hopefully openly will raise their hands. If not, we have to find, at least for me, a place to hold space for other people, because I can fill a room. I'm learning. So kind of recognizing that, asking people, tell me when I'm holding too much space so you can make space for you, because that matters and that's important. And I think we can all do that. I would love to learn more about your culture, because it's making me remember my own in Puerto Rico that at times I've lost. And I would love to bring that back. I'm sure, I don't like to talk about commonalities, but I'm sure in our similarities, there will be very rich differences that I would love to learn. And I think it's intentionally going, I need all of you at NOMA and AIA over there, and pulling you in to teach me, and we can learn together.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're gonna wrap up. I know there are a few last minute questions that we didn't get to. There's some resources that I'll send in the chat and also in the questions themselves. There was one about, you know, programs for school-age children. There's some examples like NOMA Summer Camp that I've participated as a volunteer in, that AIA Honolulu is hoping to kind of form a similar program here to expose more of our children, especially Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander children, to architecture and design. But we can, of course, talk about this forever. And those are just some resources that I hope I can share to not cut you all off at, at the heels here. But I do have to wrap up with some mahalos, of course, to our panelists, to our sponsors. I hope you all enjoyed our panel. And make sure if you've registered for the next session to hop on for that as well. We'll see you back shortly. Thank you all.
Thank you.